Well, hello everyone. My name is Anthony Dickinson and I'm Director of Portfolio Strategy and Marketing here at TV Rhine Open Sky. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's Governance, Risk and Compliance webinar. Just to set the scene, digital business is vulnerable to cyber attack, and large organizations typically have thousands of vulnerabilities. So with 60% of security budgets unable to keep up with the rising threat levels, risk practitioners agree it's critical to make investments based on real and quantifiable risk. So in today's webinar, we're going to be discussing risk prioritization and GRC implementation strategies, a threat-based approach to risk management, how to prioritize your program to maximize efficiency and functionality, how to identify quick power plays to launch a resilient GRC program, and ultimately gain valuable insight into key controls and the roles of cyber governance and GRC. But before we kick off, a few quick logistics. The presentation is going to run for about 35 to 45 minutes. And we'll keep 15 minutes aside at the end for questions. But if you'd like, during the presentation, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat box in the WebEx meeting, as I'll be monitoring that. Or, of course, you can save them to the end, and where you'll be given the opportunity to pose those questions directly to our speaker. The session is being recorded. So now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Mark Cordair. Mark is Open Sky's Chief Information Security Officer, one of our National Practice Directors, and formerly Chief Security Architect at Aetna. But that's not all. He also contributes to numerous industry forums, including the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, the Medical Device Innovation Safety Consortium, the Department of Homeland Security Cyber Incident Data and Analysis Group, and he's also a Ponemon Institute Fellow with over 25 years experience working to help organizations master risk in an increasingly digital world. So without further ado, Mark, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you for everyone for joining. This is a topic that discussed in many forums with different levels of practitioners, everything from folks that direct GRC programs, to folks that head IT risk programs, to practitioners that really love working with the Archer technology. So I look forward to hearing your questions. And let's start off with the title of the actual webinar, Quick Ins for Big Wins. Where did that come from? And that actually, there's a story behind that, and that is that it's typical for programs to go looking for low-hanging fruit and quick wins to basically get themselves off the floor and running, and demonstrating some early wins and gains. That's a great approach. However, by the second and third year of your program in running Archer, you really should not be scrabbling for quick wins too much more. You really should be looking for the big wins. This is a wonderful platform to transform the organization's ability to make management decisions in and around IT governance and risk management. So I didn't want to give a discussion and say that this is all about quick wins. That's short-term thinking. This is a big investment, and a lot of big win returns should come from it. If you have the right strategy, you'll do both. You'll find the quick ins, but you'll understand how each of those can potentially tie to those big wins, and that's what the discussion today is about. So a little bit about me and my background. This is an area of, I was chief security architect in a major healthcare organization, and I brought in the Archer product, did a formal blueprint, brought it in. Why would the chief security architect in an organization want to host an entire Archer solution and program? It wasn't that I had spare time and I was looking for more work to do. What it was really I needed a decision support system to help me in two ways. I worked for the chief technology officer who wanted me to advise him on how to manage risk and how to take risks and how to address those risks over time and monitor those risks. And I also, at the same time, had to make sure that the security organization and the broader set of control owners across IT could spend more time looking at their controls in terms of sustainability, looking at the data coming out of them, and being more focused on what the controls are doing and telling them, and less time answering to the controls in terms of regulatory and compliance burdens. So those two things that really made Archer valuable and really turned the program around. Since then, as a practice director in OpenSky, I've enjoyed working with a number of organizations. We've got over 150 clients that we work with in the Archer platform, and many more in the broader risk management space. And you'll see in some of these slides what we see as common challenges in a world where speed to market and constrained resources are the norm, and a very vigorous active threat landscape and basically surrounds all of us. So how do we handle all that? Today's agenda, we're going to talk about selecting those quick wins. We're going to also talk about what does it mean to build a decision support platform and supporting risk management as the overarching principle for that. The role of GRC in the organization, cyber governance in GRC, insight to key controls, and where do you get started, take-home messaging. Starts with durability. Every major program deserves a overarching steering committee, and this is no different. The things that you want to make sure are principally addressed in your program strategy to make sure it's durable, we've got 5 things to share. One is that as you're taking in workflows, and workflow management is a big part of Archer, you can make sure that there's an opportunity to streamline those workflows. A little bit of process modeling on the front end can make the technology solution much better. A clumsy workflow on top of smarter technology doesn't necessarily make the workflow any better. So think about the opportunity to challenge those workflows and optimize them on the way in to your Archer solutions. Garbage in, garbage out. So when you're taking on new projects and you're taking in new data sources or manually intaking data, a big part of this is really a big part of information modeling. Understanding the quality of data is really important when people are going to use that to make decisions. It's not to say that data has to be perfect to be ingested. It's just that you have to understand the quality of data to make sure that as decisions are made, it's appropriately weighted. So good data leads to good decisions and good management decision support. On the topic of alerts, sending actionable alerts and actionable data is really important. You don't want to bring in a solution that starts sending out so many email messages and other types of messages that people start to turn a deaf ear to it. This platform is about making decisions and doing the right things at the right time, and this can support that. Don't boil the ocean up front. You do have to start with the quick ends, but as I said, we're going to talk about how that ties to strategy. And ultimately ensure buy-in from risk and compliance. This is a lot about unifying areas across the organization that ultimately boil up to the board, perhaps through an audit subcommittee where you have a number of stakeholders in the meeting and you want them all thinking about the same management information. So it is about decision support here. I want you to rethink GRC. It's been a term that's been around for quite a while. What you're really doing and building here is a decision support platform. And risk is the overarching theme in GRC. So think about this. Here's some indicators that risk management is really coming to the forefront in a new way too. Starting from guidance from the National Association of Corporate Directors, 17,000 plus members that are either on your board or maybe shortly. And there was guidance issued in 2015. It was very important in that on top of the typical message of how the board should interact with the IT risk function and the chief security officer, certainly what are the top risks, what are we doing about them, and what are the risks moving forward given our business strategy. That's all in there. But deeper dive questions around how did you determine this are also part of the guidance. So how did you find that out? And really what I see, and if you read it, you might see the same, is that they're encouraging that a decision management support platform is in place to ensure that people are not just jumping at somebody else's news or being reactive when they need to be proactive. Moving on to 2016 Op Risk Conference. This is in New York last year. We were fortunate to present on the panel there. And in the midst of all those regulators and the folks on the panel, the general consensus is that regulation and checkboxes are important. However, you better have a good risk management process too, because any checkbox that comes out of a regulatory process is going to be dated about a month after it's been published. That's because the speed of threat and the speed of technology is moving much, much quicker than the speed of regulation. So every regulation will say somewhere in it, oh yeah, you better have risk management too, because ultimately this checklist is not everything you need to do. It's just the latest guidance. So you need to be vigilant on new requirements, given your business and your threat. In the Consumer Electronics Show, this was another opportunity we had to present, and we were thrilled to do it because it was the first time in the midst of all the glitz and glamour of IoT. It was the first time that group, that forum, took cybersecurity in as a track. And during that presentation, we talked about how to make threat intelligence actionable and tie it into your solutions development lifecycle, software development for IoT and the associated cloud APIs that go along with that. 2050, so that basically demonstrates that even in the world of IoT and Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, that risk management and actionable threat intelligence is an important topic. 2015 guidance this comes out of healthcare and medical devices, regulated. 2015 guidance from the FDA was very interesting in terms of risk management. They said, look, we're not going to push big checklists of controls. Here's some references. Here's some key control areas that we're concerned about, but you better do transparent risk assessments. And we worked directly with the FDA and other organizations like MDIS and threat modeling and tying that into an iterative development process was viewed as very valuable. And you need a platform to be able to manage that data and those risk assessment findings. Last but not least, if you have a lot of enterprise architecture maturity in your organization, the Open Group with their TOGAF guidance has advocated ISO 27005, which is a risk management process lifecycle, with FAIR, which is a very stringent assessment process for the risk assessment phase. It seeks to quantify your risks using both empirical data and observed subjective information as well. So all of these things are indicators that risk management is top of mind, and decision support goes along with that. Because you need to answer these questions with your solution. These are examples of high-level questions. And when I say big wins, when you embark on a major platform strategy with Archer, you should be able to turn to Archer as the place to find the answers here. And if your organization is still scrambling around when these questions come around and looking everywhere but Archer, you're not quite there yet. So you got to set your sights on these for top-down and encourage that the solutions designs and the data that you're taking in help build up to answering these questions better and better year over year with your solution. Questions like, what's the 3-year spend outlook for technology controls and security? Why is that happening? Why is the cost going up? Why can't the cost be flat? What should coverage look like for cyber insurance? Anthony mentioned I participate in the DHS organization that's very focused on the tie between security strategy and cyber insurance brokerage processes. So, and I can tell you firsthand that when you do a good job at demonstrating to cyber insurance brokers that you've got a handle on risks and a platform for figuring out what your risk looks like, that will be very well received. And if you can demonstrate how you're acting on that and that you have a great data model, they will guaranteed give you a better rate. The cost proposed control is simply too high. Now what? So this goes into the example of that you can't do everything everywhere. And but if you have a plan A approach to controls given a certain types of solutions, that perhaps some of the more mature or advanced forms of risk assessment and risk modeling, especially in Archer 6, can help you make decisions around how much should you spend and is there a plan B approach. And I've seen firsthand where this type of approach encourages people to think out of the box and say, hey, I can mitigate that risk. If you can't do it with plan A, here's a different way to handle it. And that's a good thing. What's the impact of waiting for control to be put in place? And understand cause and effect and alignment to business objectives, certainly an area where Archer can help. How should this newly approved control be designed? This is a great one because people look at investments and they do assessments to say, oh, we should be investing in these controls, but then there's a loss in sight in terms of which risk statements and risks should this control address. And that's really important for your program management office in terms of what the success look like when you haven't put that new control in place. And ultimately, how current are these risks anyways? Our recommendation is that you have to move your view of risks to a much tighter cadence. That annual view of risks is simply not fast enough. You got speed to market, but change in your businesses, your change in technology use by your enterprise and your consumers, as well as the change in the threat landscape. That these are, we encourage organizations and work with them to actually get that to be more of a quarterly view of key controls, not an annual view. And in this slide, I like to kind of poke fun at some statements and that are made typical to the security practice and IT risk practices. You hear this language all around. I've used it myself, but we're in a day and age where we have to get the data behind this. So we align with business objectives. Where is that occurring? There's a component of Archer that perfectly addresses this, but many organizations don't bother to fill that part in and lose the opportunity to translate concerns around controls and vulnerabilities and findings directly into business language. You can do that. We assess the top risks. We assess controls. Are they in the right place? And we apply controls based on risk. These are all statements that require data behind them. They can't just be lingo that we use loosely. You have to be able to point to data and say, we actually are doing these things based on information that's coming out of our Archer platform. Because risk managers, security officers, investment committees, we need decision support. You need an information model to be able to rally around that cause. And a conceptual information model can be very helpful with the oversight committee that's making sure that Archer is leveraged for the right things at the right time. So we recommend, and when we work with organizations, that you have this. Here's an example of a very high-level one that basically says if we had the top information and technology risks, and that was accurate, and we could be confident in it, we'd be able to inform innovation, technology innovation groups, and security innovation, be able to be crisp on strategic investments and rationalization. We'd be good at stakeholder messaging with the data to back it up in good times and in bad. We'd be able to converse easily with mature enterprise risk management groups that think in terms of single loss expectancy and annual loss expectancy. And ultimately, talent management. What are the skills and employee awareness that need to be in place for the broad base of employees? What do they need to know about risks to the organization? And what security talent will I need in the future if I'm going to be investing to take some of these or mitigate some of these risks? Not all security practitioners are created equal. The field of security is quite broad, and you need to be able to be smart about your skills strategy. So how do you get that information? There's 4 major pillars that you need to pull this together in Archer. And that is risk indicators, key risk indicators, assets, current and future, performance indicators, key performance indicators, and remediation management. So there's a lot of things that roll up under that, and we have a more comprehensive model, of course. But at a high level, what we're saying is we got to be able to look at where is threat activity most prominent. If you're going to prioritize based on cyber threat, and you have to understand what those KRIs are and where those sensors need to be and engage your security operations group. For assets, you need to not just know the current assets, but the future assets. So you need to work closely with your planning group and your architecture group, because risk management is forward-looking very much in principle. So the current assets and future assets are really important there. Performance indicators are a big thing, especially around key controls. Any control that gets put in place with a lot of enthusiasm after an investment is approved can suffer decay in the long term, let's say 1 to 2 to 3 years out, because the focus of the organization is on implementing other new things. Yet controls can decay based on a number of reasons, and what can offset that is if you're doing monitoring on thresholds and trending. Now, the challenge there is that KPIs, if they're designed right, there's a lot of energy, and we're all talking about prioritization of energy here. So you want to know what your key controls are so you can then basically invest in the metrics around those, not necessarily all controls in all places. And remediation management is the flow of remediation and the rate of remediation and the impact if people need to shift energy from one to the other. So a lot of data flows into this across the entire Archer data model, but at a high level, it rolls up in these major areas. And having it conceptualized allows the organization to make sure that they're designing the solutions right. They're not customizing Archer in a way that's going to paint them in a corner, and they're ingesting information and taking on new projects that actually make this view more and more crisp, so that your solution is deliberate, it's top-down architected. So when it comes to prioritization, the 80-20 rule of management can still apply. It still applies in the world of cyber risk management and security. And we advocate thinking this from both left to right and right to left, is what we say, the left hand and the right hand. Many organizations are living in the world on the right, which is that risk assessments are based on control frameworks and regulatory frameworks. And that can leave a message that you have somewhere in the magnitude of 300 plus control areas that need to be everywhere all the time at maximum maturity. And if that were practical, then I guess we wouldn't be having this discussion. But in the words of at least one of our customers, that's not financially sustainable. It's simply not done. So where are you doing it, and how do you protect yourself over time to do it right? Let's take a look at it from the left to the right. If you can take in your corporate objectives, your business impact assessments, and then infuse your threat intelligence in and around those assets, which is something that Archer can do, and generate risks that are really written more like attack scenarios as opposed to a deficiency of a control, you'll get much better view at what your key controls are. Perhaps there's 60 controls out of 300 where you know you got to be the best at these, and you'll ante up on the maturity levels and your investment and reinvestment to make sure you don't have control decay there. There's nothing worse than having a control and investing in an area only to find out that you had a compromise anyways due to deterioration of that control, or that somebody was not watching what the control was telling them. So focus on controls is really important. So we work with organizations to implement this left to right, right to left balance. You need both, because the left represents what's important and the right represents the capabilities that are in place. And this is a litmus test. If you remember nothing else, think about this image too. Can you rationalize how to spend your budget wisely? Do you have a proportional view of controls? Even if you haven't gone into the world of quantified risk management, and can you at least proportionally see the value? And so this is an example of a template we use with organizations and have delivered that basically say, if you think about your business objectives and your attack scenarios, then, and you write risk statements properly, and you write them all the same way, and you can now rate them in terms of impact and likelihood. From that view of inherent risk, you can start now aligning controls to attack scenarios which align with breakdowns in business objectives. Now you can see a return on value and controls. So if you don't fancy doing things like putting a dollar figure on a control directly, you can at least get a proportional point system in place. And you can start asking yourself, why would I spend so much money on control 10 way over at the right when the best valued control only costs half that much? What are we really doing? And you can start having some sanity in and around investment. And that also percolates down. Over to the right, as you can see, we've got investment questions to ask yourself with this view of controls, execution questions, and operational questions in and around KPIs. I like the one at the execution level. Did the PMO deliver what the investment was intended to yield? So a lot of investments start off with good intent, but if in fact the reduction of risk doesn't seem to add up at the end, you can go back and say, maybe we've got an issue with our PMO, maybe we don't have good delivery metrics when we invest and execute and deliver controls. So there may be an opportunity to improve in the delivery side. And this really ties back to cyber governance and unifying the message all the way up to executive management and up to the board. And this includes all stakeholders that need to be serviced by a good Archer strategy and implementation. The Chief Compliance Officer, Chief Risk Officer, Chief Security Officer, Head of Internal Audit. All those folks can have a unified view of what's important instead of a conflicting view. And cyber governance really means that from top down, it's clear on what the priorities are. And from bottom up, as folks respond to issues, findings, vulnerabilities, everything is attached to what's important. And at the line level, people know what to work on. And that's where remediation prioritization management is such a crucial part of your Archer implementation. So Archer's right in the center of this picture. You've got the view of IT infrastructure, and part of that involves assets and configuration. And that includes the digital enterprise, the expanding digital enterprise that needs to be protected. The digital enterprise is no longer defined by four walls, a data center, and firewalls and things inside. There's a lot going on with data analytics, with social networking, with mobile, and with cloud, as well as IoT. So that all involves the expanding enterprise and its business ecosystem. And that new perimeter also needs to be tied in through good visibility tools and pulled in. Security services, the classic assurance mechanisms and being focused on controls and all that and compliance remediation is still there. But now you've got this new opportunity to bring in the cybersecurity and the cyber threat intelligence and tie that into Archer as well. The building blocks are all there. So you have an opportunity to drive your GRC program to really make a difference. And these are some of the key factors, success factors that we typically see and help organizations with, and yours may be part of this list as well as others. But, risk intelligence for management decision-making, unified cyber governance, as I just described on the previous slide, reliable data, allowing risk-taking with confidence, clarity in investments, executive messaging with the data to back it up, and business focus, again, through business objective alignment. So now I'd like you to ask yourself, what's your target for this year, next year? We work with organizations on the journey to mastering risk. It's not mitigating risk, because sometimes you need to take risks to grow. And sometimes you need to venture into new technologies which increase risk. So you need to understand where that's appropriate and when it's time to level it off. The journey to mastering risk starts with a culture change in terms of finding risk and being comfortable talking about it. Archer 6 especially has got some great features that I like about being able to report a risk, making clear that a risk is not necessarily an issue. It's not necessarily a finding. It's good vigilance and a key part of your overall governance of the organization. When you take all those risk statements and you get them normalized in terms of how they're written and ranked, then you can start applying risk context, and this is where the Archer data model really starts to light things up for you. Information coming in from threat profiles, information coming in from vulnerability feeds, from changes in the value of projects and assets, all comes together. So you can ask the question, I have something, but so what? Does this change our priorities? And ultimately, you could start moving into mastering risk, where you can start modeling and simulating risk scenarios and be comfortable in how to not only address those, but have a smooth handoff back to security operations, because there's a huge opportunity with a modern day security operations function with cyber threat intelligence embedded, a huge opportunity for them to monitor your residual risks. Part of mastering risk is not to accept residual risk. It's to take those residual risks and seek the types of monitoring and sensors that let you determine with key risk indicators if there's a change occurring that makes that an addressable situation again. It's not about risk acceptance, it's about risk monitoring. So let's talk a little bit about with that grand view of risk and having the oversight and the top down, which start project makes sense for you, whether you're starting your journey with Archer or you're kind of restarting it with a new strategy in place. These are some things that we've worked on and that we feel are good to get started and also have a direct line to a better view of risk. Issues management, certainly with organizations that perhaps are still building out their process maturity, with things around governance and risk management. If you're in that phase, issues management is a great place to start because you can just capture what's going on. And those issues, while an issue is not necessarily a risk, there's typically a systemic issue, a systemic relationship underneath that issue that it may happen again, and that may demonstrate or point out the need to address something that may be a future risk for you as well. Vendor risk management, the supply chain, third party, fourth party, certainly a plentiful area of risk for any organization. And being able to do that through Archer allows you to align to the inherent risk of the organization, the assets, the solutions. And there's an opportunity to do some really cool stuff here, including negotiating with vendors around their posture and their timing for remediation. If, for instance, you know that the value there's an investment going on with changes in new assets, and that ties over to what the vendor is doing for you, and perhaps in 6 months you're going to be taking on new business ventures, then through the Archer relationships you can see that and go to that vendor and say, there's a change going on here, and for you to be awarded that in 6 months, you're going to have a better posture sooner than that. Asset inventory, a great place because if you don't know what your assets are, you really don't know what your job is for protection. IT, information risk, technology risk, we actually segregate those things now. There's a lot of technology risks in our work with industrial control systems and medical devices and IoT. There's a lot of technology risks that are not really information risks, but they very well could be safety risks. So we like to distinguish those things in our work and in the Archer taxonomy for risks as well. That's the top-down view. Business impact analysis. If you have a mature disaster backup and recovery group or business continuity solution, they've been at this perhaps for years. They'll have a lot of rich information that they work hard to harvest and get. And granted, it may be more availability focused, but they typically have a sense for things around integrity and confidentiality as well. So it's not a bad place to pull in and get started to kind of feed your view of, at least part of your view on inherent risks, and certainly a good view of the business for the business hierarchy part of Archer. Incident management, great place to pull in the cyber threat intelligence and the SOC folks, as I said, bringing in their data really puts a lot of rich value into probability of risks, and we help organizations do that. Many of them are stuck on inherent risk probability. They're kind of good at gauging impact of an event, but probability they kind of get stuck on. Yet with good threat intelligence and information from there, you can get a much more crisp view. So incident management is a good way to get them started because that supports their process workflows as well. Project portfolio governance is important. This is for organizations, look, we all suffer with this problem. The business is doing way more projects than I got people to review them. And I've got a certain amount of people, if I know what's going on and I can build out the trends, and maybe I can justify bringing in additional help temporarily, maybe I can justify a security maven model, maybe I can justify a better security architecture charter, but I got to know what's going on. And I have to have the key performance indicator that says, here's the projects I've reviewed. I perhaps haven't done all of them, but I know that the ones that we're not doing, that there's good criteria for why that was appropriate, or I've addressed them in a secondary means. So think of that as a big KPI around what I can and cannot review, and where's that okay. Policy management, if you haven't got started from the risk side, certainly many get started here, which is a policy management hierarchy that not only has policies and controls, but also gives flexibility around another thing that most organizations deal with, which is the merger and acquisition process. How do you bring in and incorporate another part of the organization that maybe needs to have their own autonomy or some level of autonomy, or their autonomy for maybe the first year? Well, you can certainly bring in their control processes, but still tie them into the hierarchy for the organization's overall standards and policies. So Archer is really good at doing that. So maturity phase characteristics. I mentioned with this journey to mastering risk starts with finding risk, gaining risk context first. So there's a culture aspect in terms of being able to put in information that's not automatically an audit finding. You need to be able to harvest and update that information on appropriate cadence. And again, we recommend quarterly in terms of re-rating those risks. And you have to have categorization and a good, simple rating process to get started. From there, you can apply context. And infusing cyber threat intelligence to probability is a big part of that. Using threat modeling as a form of risk assessments is also very important in this day of age. Checklists simply are not enough. Some assets and some projects deserve a more rigorous form of assessment, and that's where threat modeling comes in. Threat modeling is an art and a science. It's not a new one, but we're doing a lot more of this. And what we are seeing now is that the ability to tie that into Archer allows the organization to manage that in a sustainable way. And that takes you on your road to mastering risk, and whether it's something that you might want to do in and around Monte Carlo simulation or FAIR, which is becoming more popular as a form of risk assessment, this is the journey you can take. And these are the characteristics that you should see at each of these phases. I'll let you browse through them for a moment. Some of my favorites in this are the board is asking, under finding risks, the board is asking for risks, and all we have is a controls posture. That's not what they're asking for anymore. Think of the NACD guidance I mentioned. We don't know our key controls, what our key controls should be, or if they're designed correctly. Under gaining risk context, we can't scale and maintain the risk register in an orderly cadence. And under mastering risk, we talk about defense in depth, but our controls are not really layered. So the understanding the connection and the attack scenarios. So this is what we see and support organizations with as they grow towards a mastering risk phase. So in closing, we're going to open it up for questions. In closing, the take-home message is that whether you're starting or restarting your Archer strategy, there's a huge opportunity to align the organization for cyber governance, to infuse threat intelligence into your models, and make sure that there's clarity and the organization is not reacting to every bump in the road and every news item in the paper around another attack. Staying focused and having the right decision support criteria to feel comfortable with that is what this is all about. Anthony.
Thank you, Mark, for such an insightful presentation. You certainly covered an awful lot in the last 40 minutes or so. So at this point, if you've got questions for Mark, then please do feel free to unmute yourselves and ask your question. Alternatively, you can type it into the chat box and I can ask Mark on your behalf. Nothing just yet. So Mark, perhaps, some of the questions that we often hear, and I guess, when you're running your GRC program in the way that you've defined, what does that steering group look like? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a frequent question. It's a really important one too, to make sure that the program doesn't get put off track by changes in leadership. The durability aspect. When we do work with organizations, we worked with one around their Archer strategy and architecture recently, and in this case, and this is a really good model. It's a 3-layered governance model, and that may sound like overkill, but here's why it's not. The top level is the executive layer. The stakeholders, the positioning of the program, what kind of information should go in, high-level priorities. That's the highest level. The lowest level is the technology committee that really oversees the use of the solution and the ability to manage upgrades and decisions around the platform at a technical level. It's the middle level that's really important. I talked a lot about information modeling, and the middle organization is really responsible to oversee the type of data that's coming in and out of it, and to make sure that the data is clean enough, the authoritative sources are understood for the data, so you have integrity in that, and that you're not taking in data that's just not relevant to what the platform goals are. So a 3-layer approach: executive level, information model level, technology level.
Thanks, Mark. Great answer. Again, if anyone would like to ask a question, then please do feel free to take yourselves off mute and ask Mark your question. So, Mark, what about, so threat intelligence is a really hot topic today. And so where does that, and say, for instance, security operations that it tends to sit inside, where does that fit into a model like this?
It's very good. Probably one of the most important things to think about in terms of modern day programs, especially if you're restarting it. It's a bidirectional relationship. There's the ability for the SOC to receive reports of residual risks from the program so that it can seek to incorporate the sensors and the key risk indicators to monitor those risks. That's the information flow into the SOC. Please help us monitor these residual risks. We've done as much as we can. We don't want to accept these risks blindly. The information coming back out of the SOC, especially with strategic threat intelligence, as opposed to the operational threat intelligence that you get with things like indicators of threat and compromise. The strategic threat intelligence can backfeed the risk assessments and the assumptions about risks that should be coloring the probability of events, as well as those threat models I mentioned that are done at the asset level. So it's all about leveraging that information to see if the probabilities are changing and the assumptions are changing, and that may change your priorities.
Right, okay. Thank you, Mark. That's another great answer. Well, I don't think we've got any more questions from the audience, so I think all that's left for me to do really is to thank you very much, Mark, for your time and for your insights, and to thank everybody else for their time for joining us, and to hope that you found this webinar useful. Please do feel free to reach out to us if we can help you with your quick ins for big wins in relation to risk management and GRC. So thank you very much, everyone.